Good evening, and welcome. Tonight we delve into a profoundly significant and often contentious issue, the question of mandatory vaccination. Is it an essential public health measure or an unacceptable infringement on individual liberties? Joining us to explore this complex terrain are two distinguished guests. Dr. Kenji Tanaka, an epidemiologist whose work focuses on population health dynamics, and Ms. Isabella Rossi, a human rights lawyer with expertise in medical ethics. Our discussion will proceed with opening statements, followed by 2 rounds of moderated debate and concluding remarks from each guest. Dr. Tanaka, would you please begin?
Thank you, Dr. Reed. From an epidemiological standpoint, mandatory vaccination, particularly for highly communicable diseases, represents an ethically justifiable and scientifically indispensable tool for safeguarding public health. Its necessity hinges primarily on the principle of herd immunity or community immunity. This isn't merely about protecting oneself. It's about establishing a protective barrier for the entire community, crucially shielding those who cannot be vaccinated. Infants too young, individuals with compromised immune systems, or those with specific medical contraindications. Their safety is intrinsically linked to the vaccination levels within the broader population. History provides compelling evidence. The eradication of smallpox, a monumental public health achievement, relied heavily on systematic, often compulsory, vaccination campaigns. Similarly, the dramatic reduction of diseases like polio and measles in many parts of the world is directly attributable to high vaccination coverage, often bolstered by school entry mandates. Therefore, I contend that vaccination transcends personal choice. It becomes a civic duty. This aligns with the harm principle, the well-established ethical concept that individual autonomy can be legitimately restricted to prevent foreseeable harm to others. Allowing vaccine-preventable diseases to circulate causes demonstrable harm. While I acknowledge the genuine concerns regarding individual autonomy, liberty is not absolute. Society routinely accepts limitations on freedom for the greater good. Think of traffic laws or smoking bans. Mandatory vaccination, in specific high-risk contexts and backed by overwhelming scientific consensus on safety and efficacy, represents a proportionate response to a significant public health threat.
Thank you, Dr. Tanaka. Ms. Rossi, your opening statement?
Thank you, Dr. Reed. While I recognize the public health goals Dr. Tanaka eloquently describes, I must argue forcefully against mandatory vaccination based on fundamental human rights principles. At its core, mandating any medical intervention, including vaccination, constitutes a profound infringement upon bodily autonomy, the right of every individual to control their own body and make decisions about their own health. This principle of bodily integrity is paramount and forms the bedrock of medical ethics and human rights law. Furthermore, mandatory vaccination fundamentally undermines the principle of informed consent. True consent must be given freely, without coercion or undue pressure. When vaccination is required as a condition for employment, education, or full participation in society, the element of choice is effectively removed, transforming consent into compliance. We must also acknowledge that while vaccines are overwhelmingly safe, no medical procedure is entirely without risk. Individuals experience adverse effects, however rare. Each person has the right to weigh the perceived risks and benefits for themselves and their children, based on their own health status, values, and beliefs, without state compulsion. There is also the perilous potential for state overreach. Granting the government the power to mandate medical interventions sets a dangerous precedent. Where does it stop? This raises legitimate concerns about a slippery slope towards increasing governmental control over deeply personal health decisions. Finally, we must question the necessity and proportionality of mandates. Have all less restrictive alternatives truly been exhausted? Robust public health education, ensuring equitable and easy access, addressing misinformation transparently, and building community trust are vital strategies that respect autonomy. Mandates risk alienating segments of the population, potentially exacerbating distrust in public health institutions and disproportionately impacting marginalized communities.
Thank you both for those clear opening positions. Let's move into our first discussion round, focusing on this core tension, the public good versus individual rights. Dr. Tanaka, Ms. Rossi raises crucial points about autonomy and consent. How do we ethically reconcile the compelling public health goal of widespread immunity with these fundamental individual rights? Where, precisely, should the line be drawn, and who gets to draw it?
The reconciliation lies in acknowledging the gravity and the scale of the threat posed by infectious diseases. We are not discussing minor inconveniences. We are dealing with agents capable of causing widespread illness, disability, and death, overwhelming healthcare systems, and disrupting society. In such high-stakes situations, the collective benefit of preventing mass harm, particularly to the most vulnerable, decisively outweighs the limitation on individual autonomy, which, while important, is not absolute. Legal frameworks globally recognize that rights can be limited when necessary to protect public health or the rights of others. The line should be drawn based on rigorous scientific evidence. The severity of the disease, its transmissibility, the proven efficacy and safety of the vaccine, and the demonstrable inadequacy of voluntary measures to achieve necessary protection levels. Decisions should be made by public health authorities, guided by independent scientific advisory bodies, operating transparently and subject to oversight, not political whim.
Dr. Tanaka frames the limitation on autonomy as justifiable, but I challenge the notion that forcing a medical intervention is ever a minor infringement. It is fundamental. Injecting a substance into one's body against one's will is a significant violation of personal sovereignty. The threshold for overriding such a fundamental right must be extraordinarily high, and demonstrably the only viable option. Are we always certain that threshold has been met? Furthermore, the question of who decides remains deeply problematic. Concentrating such power in state authorities, even with scientific input, carries inherent risks of bias, error, or even abuse. The ethical hazards of coercion are substantial. It breeds resentment and distrust, potentially undermining cooperation with public health initiatives in the long run.
So the core of this is proportionality. Dr. Tanaka, are mandates truly the least restrictive means necessary? Ms. Rossi suggests alternatives haven't been fully explored.
While education and access are crucial and must be pursued vigorously, experience often shows they alone are insufficient to reach the high coverage levels needed for robust herd immunity against highly contagious diseases like measles. When voluntary uptake plateaus below that critical threshold, and vulnerable populations remain exposed, mandates become a necessary, albeit regrettable, tool. They are the least restrictive means effective in achieving the essential public health outcome in those specific circumstances.
I disagree that effectiveness automatically equates to justification when fundamental rights are at stake. Perhaps the necessary threshold for herd immunity itself needs reevaluation in the context of rights. Or perhaps we need more innovative, community-led, trust-building approaches, rather than resorting immediately to coercion when initial voluntary efforts seem insufficient.
Let's shift to the practical dimension in our second round. Considering implementation challenges, enforcement, managing exemptions, the potential impact on public trust, and the availability of alternatives, how viable and ultimately desirable are mandatory vaccination policies? Ms. Rossi, perhaps you could begin this round?
Certainly. The practical hurdles are immense and often underestimated. How are mandates enforced? Through fines? Exclusion from essential services like education or employment? This inevitably leads to inequality, disproportionately penalizing those who may already be marginalized or have less access to legal recourse. Establishing fair and consistent exemption processes, medical, perhaps religious or philosophical, is fraught with difficulty and potential for misuse or discrimination. Crucially, imposing mandates risks severely damaging the fragile trust between citizens and public health institutions. When people feel coerced, they may become more resistant not only to the mandated vaccine, but to other health recommendations as well, paradoxically increasing overall vaccine hesitancy. We risk winning a battle, but losing the war for public trust. Therefore, investing in alternatives seems far more desirable and sustainable. Transparent communication campaigns that address concerns respectfully, tackling misinformation head-on, ensuring vaccines are free and easily accessible everywhere, and engaging community leaders to build trust from the ground up.
Dr. Tanaka, your response to these practical and trust-related concerns?
The implementation complexities are real, but they are not insurmountable. Well-designed policies can address these issues. Clear, narrow, and scientifically grounded criteria for medical exemptions are feasible. Enforcement mechanisms can be structured to minimize punitive aspects, focusing perhaps on access to non-essential activities rather than fundamental rights. Though this remains complex, regarding trust, the dynamic is not always straightforward. While coercion can erode trust, perceived government inaction in the face of a serious health threat can also damage public confidence. Decisive action, including mandates when scientifically justified, can signal a strong commitment to protecting public safety, potentially reinforcing trust among the majority who understand the necessity. And while alternatives like education and access are vital components of any strategy, relying solely on them has often proven insufficient to reach and maintain the high vaccination thresholds required for diseases like measles or pertussis. Mandates provide a necessary backstop when voluntary measures fall short of protecting the community adequately.
But is there conclusive evidence that mandates consistently achieve significantly higher rates than highly optimized, well-funded, trust-based voluntary programs, especially considering the potential backlash?
The evidence for the effectiveness of mandates, particularly school entry mandates, in boosting and sustaining high coverage for established childhood vaccines is quite robust historically. Whether that translates perfectly to all situations, like adult mandates for novel vaccines, requires careful consideration of context, but the principle holds. They are a powerful tool for ensuring population-level protection when needed.
We are approaching the end of our discussion time. I'd like to move to closing statements. Each of you will have a final opportunity to summarize your position. Dr. Tanaka, please proceed.
Thank you. To summarize, the case for mandatory vaccination in specific circumstances rests on solid scientific and ethical foundations. Scientifically, it is about achieving herd immunity, the collective defense required to protect everyone, especially the most vulnerable among us, from preventable suffering and death caused by dangerous infectious diseases. Ethically, it is grounded in the harm principle, our shared responsibility to prevent causing harm to others. Vaccination is not merely a personal health decision, it has profound implications for community well-being. History demonstrates that mandates have been instrumental in the successful control and even eradication of devastating diseases. They are a proven, effective public health intervention. Concerns about autonomy, while valid, must be weighed against the potential for widespread harm. Limiting one freedom, the choice to refuse a safe and effective vaccine, can be a reasonable and proportionate measure to protect the fundamental right to health and life for the entire community. This is analogous to numerous other societal obligations we accept to ensure public safety and function collectively. Therefore, I urge that policy decisions be guided by robust scientific evidence, epidemiological necessity, and a strong commitment to collective responsibility. Widespread vaccination, supported by mandates when essential, saves lives and is a cornerstone of modern public health.
Thank you, Dr. Tanaka. Ms. Rossi, your closing statement.
Thank you. My position remains firm. Mandatory vaccination, while potentially well-intentioned, represents an unacceptable overreach by the state into the realm of personal autonomy and bodily integrity. These rights, the right to decide what happens to our own bodies, the right to informed consent free from coercion, are not negotiable privileges to be suspended lightly for perceived collective benefit. They are fundamental human rights. The risks associated with mandates extend beyond the individual violation. They risk eroding public trust in health authorities, potentially fostering greater resistance to health advice in the future. They risk creating societal divisions and discrimination, particularly against those who cannot or choose not to comply. And they set a dangerous precedent for future government intrusions into personal life and medical decisions. Ethical, sustainable, and ultimately more effective public health strategies lie in non-coercive approaches. We must redouble our efforts in transparent education, addressing concerns and misinformation with respect and evidence, ensuring truly equitable and convenient access to vaccines, and crucially, rebuilding trust through open dialogue and community engagement. Sacrificing fundamental individual liberty at the altar of public health, without exhausting every less intrusive alternative and carefully considering the long-term social costs, is a path fraught with peril. We must champion both public health and individual freedom. The optimal path forward respects both, fostering health through empowerment and trust, not compulsion.
Dr. Tanaka, Ms. Rossi, thank you both for your articulate, insightful, and impassioned contributions to this vital discussion. You have clearly illuminated the profound tension between the critical need to protect public health through measures like vaccination and the imperative to safeguard individual liberties and bodily autonomy. As is often the case with such complex ethical dilemmas, there are no easy answers. The path forward requires careful consideration, ongoing dialogue, and a commitment to balancing competing values. Thank you to our audience for joining us for this important debate. Good evening.